The next pitch is a little bit different for a couple of reasons. One, it's in Wyoming. It's not an Aussie-based project. And secondly, it's in situ recovery uranium, which hopefully is quite interesting for everyone. So in a moment, Bruce Lane, the Executive Director of GTI Energy, is going to come and speak to you. But first, we've got a little video from GTI to play for a bit of education, I believe.
Right, it worked. Thanks everyone for sticking around to hear about GTI and watching the little fluff piece. I'll talk to you principally about our Lohema project, which is our flagship project today, but I'll also touch on our other projects. When I get this to work. So please do your own research. There will be likely some forward-looking statements here. I'm not providing investment advice. So we're in the USA, as is evident from the little movie you saw, and we're in Wyoming. And Wyoming is historically the leading USA uranium state, particularly in contemporary times. And it's the home of in-situ recovery development and mining, which is critical to our story, and I'll touch on more on that. So we have uranium pounds on the books at the moment, and we're in the process of developing those projects. So I was at a conference last week, and the esteemed panel, and they were a very good panel, said when somebody tells you the story about their company and they talk about the commodity a lot, it's a red flag that the project's no good. Now, I am going to talk a little bit about the commodity. I'll try and focus it on the US and why the US is a particularly unique set of circumstances. Clearly, if you're still in the room, you're interested in uranium, you probably know a little bit about what's happening with the commodity. So I'll try not to bore you with too much detail about that and try and stick to what's special about the US. So many of you will be aware that the US has been a big player in uranium and nuclear power for years. Back in 2009, the Department of Commerce published a report which really helped everyone realise and reminded them about how important nuclear power is in the US and how strategically important it is to them. 20% of their baseload power and 50% of their green energy. So turning off 1 gigawatt of nuclear reactor forces a requirement for a lot of alternative supply, and windmills and solar panels aren't going to do the job, they know that. If you look at the bottom half of this pie chart, you'll see that about half of their uranium supply has been coming out of Kazakhstan or Russia. And at the moment, that supply is having to come not via St. Petersburg as it used to, but in a rather circuitous fashion. Some of that uranium, when it turns up in the US, some of the ports aren't accepting it. It's a little bit tricky. But certainly going forward, it seems hard to imagine that US utilities are going to be writing future contracts with Kazakhstan or Russian supply. So immediately, the US, you can see the US needs 50 million pounds a year out of a global supply of around about 200 million pounds. And half of that is coming from a source which is no longer really going to be viable for them. So it kind of underpins the immediate challenge. I won't run through the supply-demand gap. I think it's pretty obvious there is a supply-demand gap. The pink part of that chart, you'll see down in the bottom left-hand corner, you might not be able to see it, but that's coming from unspecified supply. And this is the reference case. This is not the optimistic scenario for supply. So there is a gap. And this chart shows it as a Western-only supply-demand gap, so it's even worse. So clearly something has to change in terms of the supply side. And this rather spectacular graph from the Visual Capitalist, you'll see in about 1990, the US stops producing uranium altogether because the incentives for production were removed, and that happened at the same time as the megatons to megawatts program started, where the Russian warheads, in about 1993, Russian warheads were being reprocessed into nuclear fuel, and that utilities were buying their pounds at around an effective rate of, say, $5 a pound, which meant that all uranium supply was sub-economic in the US. So it killed the industry and this is the contemporary end of the chart from 2000 onwards. You can see that uranium mining died altogether in the US. But that is changing because we know the price is coming back. So there's two factors. Obviously the secondary supply pounds now seem to have disappeared, inventories have dried up, and the price is responding. I think last night we were sort of back around $67 at spot, and we know that contract price now is well north of $60. It's a bit hard to determine exactly what it is. So that means that uranium production in the US, some of it's coming back into supply. So Lost Creek here is our near neighbour, 10 miles away in Wyoming. And then, so UEC's Willow Creek is due to be back in production, we believe, sometime in the next year or so. They're close to us again, and I'll show you a map. The Lance Project Peninsula, some of you, if you're locals, will be aware of Peninsula. They were hoping to be back in production this year. They're probably going to be the end of next year. They're about 100 miles away. The reason these guys are back in production is their brownfields restarts, for the most part, and their all-in sustaining cost is in the range of maybe $35 to $40 a pound. And if the contract price is around 60, 65, clearly there's good money to be made. Previously, these guys were supplying their contracts out of the spot market, and so they still have customers, they still have all of the infrastructure. It's just now they're switching over to mining their own pounds. So it's important context for what we're trying to achieve. The other thing just to touch on is the in situ recovery process. For those that aren't familiar with it, the way it's mined is injecting a leach solution into the subterranean rock. These deposits are roll front, sandstone hosted roll front deposits. And in the particular part of Wyoming we're in, and it is the predominant form of mining, it's an alkaline lixiviant, so it's essentially baking soda is injected with oxygen and carbon dioxide under pressure into the sandstone below the water table. And this a slow leach kinetic releases the uranium into a solution, which is then extracted, and the solution is put over an ion exchange tower. Resin beads are then taken off and stripped and dried into yellow cake, and the water goes through a treatment plant and back into the aquifer. So it's a very clean, very efficient form of mining. It's responsible for about 60% of the world's uranium now, from Kazakhstan, which is an acid process. Boss Energy in South Australia is due to start processing again. It's an acid plant again. But all of the plants in Wyoming, apart from Peninsula, which has been switched over to acid, are all alkaline. So from an environmental point of view and a cost point of view, it's very efficient, very clean. Here's the illustration, just sort of stark kind of illustration of the difference between a hard rock uranium mine and this is the largest in situ recovery mine in America. Cameco's Smith Ranch Highland, 10 miles away from our lead project. And the groundwater you see there is not processed water, it's just natural groundwater. So I was able to walk, when I went to visit this, I was able to walk in amongst all that. There's animals can graze in there and what have you. So it's a bit different to traditional form of mining. It's a good ESG story. So our focus is on building ISR-able uranium resources, or ISR amenable resources. We're obviously close to a lot of infrastructure, and I'll talk about that a bit. Our exploration is really targeted. It's based on brownfields information. We have quite a bit of historical data, and we've got some people who have been operating in this area since the 70s. So we're not really reinventing anything. there'll be no chemistry sets involved in developing our process and implementing a mine. It's tried and tested. So, and really what we're trying to do is create some options. So our neighbours, I'm not sure if has this got a pointer on it? It has. So that's our lead project, Lohuma, and that Cameco Smith Ranch Highland photograph you saw is right here, 10 miles away. And then down here, we're in the Great Divide Basin. We've got Lost Creek right here, and they're currently producing, and they're about to start work on developing their Shirley Basin project over here. And to give you an idea, that project there is about £6 or £7 million on the PEA. And so that's a sort of a viable target for a satellite project that'll just have an ion exchange tower, and then they'll take the beads, the resin beads, they'll truck them back to Lost Creek, which is about 30 miles away, and process them there. So their back-end operation has a £2 million capacity, and their bore field here at Lost Creek is a million pounds of licensed capacity, and they're not producing up to that, and their Shirley Basin will be, say, 600,000 or 700,000 pounds. So they'll still have spare capacity even when these two are both operating. So that clearly shows the potential for a project like ours, which is quite close by, to work with our neighbours on a resin processing basis, or some other arrangement. But really the point of all this is there's 7 permitted and licensed operating facilities here in this region. This is where production is getting restarted in the US. There's more in Texas as well, a little bit in Texas with UEC, but this is the major area that we're starting to see production coming back. And this is just an illustration. You can see all these deposits here are satellite deposits and/or deposits with central processing on them. So it's quite common with these roll front deposits. We'll find something that's big enough to justify a central processing plant, and if it's close to 10 million pounds, that's probably enough. And then once the bore fields get depleted, you can go and drill another bore field close by, or even 100 miles away, and you can truck the resin beads back, and it's the economics are quite good for that. It doesn't hurt the economics too much. So look, this is just a different illustration of what I showed you before. There's our Lohuma project next to Cameco, and then we're talking about 100 miles down here to the Great Divide Basin. And in the Great Divide Basin, we've got 2 project areas, I guess, groups of projects. The blue projects here are the original projects we had, and we also have this Green Mountain project. So the 3 projects, Lohuma is the most advanced. We've got a JORC resource of 5.7 million pounds. We've developed that resource from historical drill logs and data, so we've got some verification drilling to do there this year to bring as much as we can of that into indicated. At Great Divide Basin, we've done a couple of seasons of drilling on, and our Green Mountain project, we're doing drill targeting as we speak. So you can see here, total resources 7.4 million pounds at inferred, and we'll be bringing some of that into indicated, hopefully towards the end of this year, early next year, and then an exploration target of somewhere in the region of sort of 12 to 20 million pounds in addition, and that's without putting anything into the resource table for our Green Mountain project. So Lohuma, as I said before, 10 miles away roughly from Cameco's plant. We bought a drill database earlier this year, and we've been able to scan and digitise that and bring resources onto the book out of that, and that is our focus going forward. Interesting to note that the historical exploration has primarily been in the shallower part of the formation. I think back then they were looking at conventional mining and not in ISR, so it's in this Eocene and Paleocene era, but there's an area down here in the Fort Union Formation. That's where Cameco is producing out of 10 miles away. We don't have drill holes into that part of the formation yet. So part of our program is to drill those deeper holes and see if we've got mineralisation there, which could make quite a significant difference to what we're doing. But our exploration will be to verify, extend along trend, and to test the depth. We have trends here in the Great Divide Basin, which we marked out. We have tested some of those. There's plenty more to get on with, but we're prioritising our Lohuma project for the time being. And then at Green Mountain, this area here, We've flown geophysics, just waiting for the final interpretation of the geophysics, and we'll match that with our historical drill holes and test our drill targets. So the idea there is we'll get the permits in place this year, and then hopefully we'll drill on that next year. So just to finish up in terms of what's to come up, or what's upcoming, we've got the geophysics results, and then it'll help us with our drill targeting and permitting for Green Mountain. We're just waiting on permitting to be completed for our Lohuma project, and we'll hopefully be drilling there before Christmas. If not, then we'll drill next year. And then we'll see what happens with that program, but we're heading as quickly as we can towards a PEA. I guess it depends on how many pounds we have and what we find from that next drill program. So just to finish off on our corporate bits and pieces, we got at the last quarter we had $3.5 million in the bank. We've got some bond money coming back from the Wyoming LQD. So probably at the moment we're probably around that sort of 3.5 mark, and we'll spend a bit of that into the back end of the year. Just in terms of the corporate side, Jim Boffman, he's a local and has had a successful exit in the past to Uranium One with High Plains, and Doug Beam has been exploring for and developing uranium and various other things in this part of the world, particularly including in situ recovery since the 70s. And so they're really the core of our local content. We just run a light office here in Perth, and they've been a big part of helping us not only identify the deposits but also getting them developed. So pretty straightforward story. USA has recommitted to nuclear power in a big way, targeting 300 gigawatts from the current 100 gigawatts. They really aren't supplying their own uranium at all, and we hope to help fill the gap going forward. We've got resources, we're surrounded by infrastructure and processing and partners, and so we're just focused on getting on and developing those resources and putting more definition around them. So thanks very much for taking the time, and I'll hand over to you. Sorry.
Thanks, Bruce. Questions for Bruce? I do want to ask about Wyoming in particular and the concentration of all the different operations around there. Two things. One, when the PEA comes out for an in-situ project, what kind of benefits do you expect to see from existing infrastructure and also timelines to production? And secondly, why isn't there more consolidation in the area if everyone's just dotted around doing the same thing? Why hasn't someone come in and bought it?
Yeah, look, I think maybe I'll start with that one. It's not too long ago that nobody really cared, and it's only really since the uranium prices headed into that sort of $50 plus range. So it's really a very contemporary phenomena that people companies and investment people are interested in uranium. So I think what we'll start to see is there has been a little bit of consolidation, but I think there will be more, and that'll be a theme in the industry. There is a challenge with people. I mean, the industry's been in the doldrums for a long time. So a lot of people who were in the industry in the 70s and 80s have either left or retired, and in some cases they've passed on to the next world. So there aren't a lot of young people in the business. So the consolidation will be a factor going forward for sure. Look, in terms of the industry in general and the local scene, it's obviously very well supported by the government. Wyoming's the second largest energy state in the US. It's the second least populated. Coal, wind, oil and gas, uranium, they really do understand energy. They know that their coal business is a bit on the nose, so to speak, so they're very keen to support uranium, and they've been very active in the House, putting bills in front of the House in the US to try and promote uranium interests. So there's good support and a good history of the neighbours working together, because there is capacity in the back end of their production plants that's available, and that is generally always the case. So resin processing agreements are reasonably common in amongst the neighbours. So yeah, there is a real opportunity there to work with the neighbours and to access that infrastructure.
Okay, thanks Bruce.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.